Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this rule and the underlying legislation. This is the 23rd closed rule of this short new Congress. Both Democrats and Republicans have been denied the opportunity to amend nearly 60% of the legislation that has been brought to the floor through the House Rules Committee. This effort by Speaker Ryan and the Republican leadership to halt a fair and open debate in the People's House is outrageous. We're supposed to be a deliberative body where both parties get to deliberate. These Putin-esque rules that shut down all debate need to stop. This isn't the Kremlin. You know, I think Representative Rooney, a Republican, said it best last week, and I quote, "I've been in this job 8 years, and I'm racking my brain to think of one thing our party has done that has been something positive, that's been something other than stopping something else from happening," end quote. Well, Mr. Speaker, today we are considering a piece of legislation that seeks to prevent the EPA from protecting public health and the environment. Not exactly positive. This bill was brought to the Rules Committee in an emergency meeting last night. And let me emphasize that, an emergency meeting. Mr. Speaker, I think the American people have a pretty good idea of what is and what isn't an emergency. A tree falls on your house, that's an emergency. Your rose bush needs pruning, not an emergency. Timmy fell down a well, that's an emergency. Timmy might stub his toe, not an emergency. On April 28th, the government will run out of money, that's an emergency. Even if it is a self-inflicted, even if it is self-inflicted by the Republicans. And we have no shortage of other actual emergencies that we should be dealing with. A devastating opiate epidemic, crumbling roads and bridges, mounting evidence of Russian meddling in our election, and people being killed every day due to gun violence. Not to mention, Flint, Michigan is still dealing with the residual health effects of toxically polluted water. These are not just a few examples of actual emergencies that Congress is doing nothing to address. Instead, the underlying bill, the EPA Science Advisory Board Reform Act, is brought to the Rules Committee and to the House floor as an emergency piece of legislation. As we learned last week, the American people are paying attention to what we do here. They are smart enough to know what an emergency is, and this bill isn't addressing an emergency. Mr. Speaker, it is creating one. The Science Advisory Board at the EPA provides a way for the agency to use sound, independent, and objective scientific data to help make their decisions. Science, Mr. Speaker, you may have heard of it, it's kind of a big deal. But this bill won't help the EPA to include more scientists in their decisions. It will force them to include people with potential financial conflicts of interest on the Science Advisory Board so long as they disclose them. I mean, do we really want people on our advisory boards if they could profit from a decision that they are about to make? There's nothing scientific about corruption, and that's exactly what this bill will open the door to. This bill also limits the participation of scientific experts at the EPA, leading to a disproportionate representation of big business and corporate special interests. Are these really the people we want making decisions about the health of our kids and the policies that should be protecting our environment? Is that what we want? So what is this bill really about? Well, it's about allowing the Republicans' big corporate cronies a direct route to the decision makers at the EPA. It's about disrupting the EPA's ability to fairly enforce the rules, hold corporate polluters accountable, and protect our health. It's about undermining scientific fact with political cronyism. Now, maybe things have changed lately. It's been a while since my last science class, but I'm pretty sure there's no step in the scientific method that says consult corporate cronies. The truth is that this Republican majority wants the EPA to base their decisions on fiction, not fact. Americans can't afford to have the EPA run by people who live in a fantasy land where facts and science don't matter. Our environment and the health of our families is too important. This law is going to have real-life consequences. It undermines science, hurts the environment, and it helps polluters. We need to allow the EPA to make decisions based on fact, We need to ensure that EPA is always free from financial conflicts, not making decisions based on panels filled with industry insiders like the ones that this bill would create. Mr. Speaker, this bill defies logic. It defies reason. It defies sanity. It will hurt the people who sent us here, and it will help polluters. Republicans are putting corporate greed ahead of public health, and the American people will be the ones who will suffer. Americans deserve better. We should be fighting on behalf of the American people. And, Mr. Speaker, let me tell my Republican friends what I tell first graders that I talk to back in my district in Massachusetts when I go to visit their schools. I usually begin by telling them that science is important. It's a big deal. And it's such a big deal that all our schools teach it. And if you do your homework and if you study hard and you pay attention, you might grow up someday to become a scientist. And scientists are people who dedicate their lives to protect the health and well-being of people all over the world. And they dedicate their lives to protect our planet. Scientists tell us things that are really important. They tell us things like climate change is caused by greenhouse gases, something my Republican friends continually deny. They tell us that polluted air can give children asthma. They tell us that lead in children's drinking water causes learning problems. They tell us pesticide exposure can cause cancer. These are important things. And we all learned in school, thanks to science, that the Earth orbits around the sun, that gravity causes this pen to fall when I drop it, that plants turn sunshine into energy, that dinosaurs roamed the Earth millions of years ago. You know, Mr. Speaker, the first graders I talk to, they get it. They understand the importance of science. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues in this chamber do not. You know, and I would bet that those first graders understand the importance of making sure that it is scientists who sit on scientific advisory boards and not corporate cronies. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.